Welcome to section 6. In this session, we'll be looking at security technology, firewalls, and VPNs, virtual private networks. Under this session, we'll look at access controls, we'll look at firewalls, then we'll look at protecting remote connections. Now, it's important to note that technical controls are essential in enforcing policy for many IT functions that do not involve direct human control. With that said, let's take a look at access control. Now, what is access control? We can define it as a method by which systems determine whether and how to admit a user into a trusted area of an organization. So if you take this setting to be an organization, for instance, what measures or methods have been put to determine whether or not someone has been given the permission to be within this space or not? This is what constitutes access control. It means that the access to the particular area has a control, has a determinant attached to it. Now, we have mandatory access controls, which usually use data schemes. We have the non-discretionary controls, which is strictly enforced. It's a strict enforcement of the mandatory access controls. Then we also have ones which are discretionary, and those ones are usually an option of the data user to implement or not. Let's look at identification. Identification. It's a mechanism whereby an unverified entity seeks to have access to a resource proposed. Who seeks to have access to a resource? He proposes a label by which they are known to the system. What does this mean? You need to have an identity within a system. So by identification, it is going through the process where you initially have no verification, you're not known, but on your request sent, you are given a certain label by which you will be identified, you will be known within the system. Now, that particular entity that is seeking that label so that it can have an identity is referred to as the supplicant. In some companies or most institutions, you have index numbers given out and so on and so forth as students, because initially they are unverified, and when they are given into the system, they are given unique codes, randomized within ranges and so on and so forth. Other organizations add have alphanumerical duplicates and so on and so forth. So these are all forms for generalization of how identities are given to entities which request them through the right means based on whichever organization that is in question. Now we talk about authentication. When we talk about authentication, after the supplicant has requested for an identity, there's a process to validate that that supplicant has the identity that they are talking about. So just like in a normal institution, if you are given an ID, you need to take the ID to a particular systems administration point where they can tell for sure, oh, truly, this identity that you have been given fits within identities we have issued out, and truly that is you. When that is done, it means that you have been authenticated. In some places, it could be a password. When you have created an email address, you choose your own password and all that. To be able to show that truly you are the one giving that, most systems will make you go through a login process where you have to now enter that identity you were given. Then if it goes through, it means truly you are the one who owns that identity based on whatever password, in some cases, passphrases that you were given. Now, after this is done, we look at authorization. What's authorization? After being given an identity and going through authentication, based on whatever level within the organization that you have access to, you need to be authorized. You might be a student, but you might not have access to lecture resources, a lecturer's resource. So yes, you might have been identified and you might have been authenticated, but you need to be given authorization so you can have access to what it is, what's due you. And that is the process of matching the authenticated entity or supplicant through a list based on whatever they are trying to have access to check their access level and see what they are permitted to have and what they are not permitted to have, and so on and so forth. Then we look at accountability, which ensures that all actions on a system authorized or unauthorized, can be attributed to an authenticated identity. So under accountability, it is such that any action taken within the system by one who has an identity, whether at that point in time they were authorized or not, can be tracked and traced to that particular identity or that individual in this instance. Most often, it's accomplished by means of system logs. So usually in an organization, when you are going to work with the system's machinery, you log in so we can track you. You do an addition, take a bank teller, we know whose ID entered the system, who did the transaction, and so on and so forth. So every action that you take within the organization, you can be held accountable to because your system log is being tracked, as an example. Then let's take a look at firewalls. Fire and wall. The wall suggests that something that is cannot be penetrated. The fire suggests a protective measure around the wall. So they are trying to prevent specific types of information from moving between the outside world. So we are within an organization, we don't want you to just pass certain information out there, whether knowingly or unknowingly. So we put a virtual wall there and we put a security around it. So we call it a firewall. So that we prevent certain types of information from moving from or between the outside world and the inside world, which in this case will be the network that the organization is working within. Now these firewalls may be separate computer systems. They may be software services that are running on existing routers or server systems somewhere. They could also be separate network containing supported devices or supporting devices. Now, firewall processing modes. There are 5 processing modes by which firewalls can be categorized. So we have packet filtering, we have application gateways, we have circuit gateways, we have the MAC layer firewalls, and we have hybrids. These are all processing modes. Then we can take a look briefly at the firewall architecture. Now, the firewall device can be configured in a number of network connection architectures. There are so many of it. Now, for best configuration, it depends on 3 factors. What are the objectives of the network? What is the aim of that network that you are trying to put a firewall on? What is the organization's ability to develop and implement the architecture? Yes, because there could be an architecture that the company might want to use, but they might not have the ability to be able to enforce it. So that is also very necessary to consider before you want to run any configuration. Then you look at the budget availability for the function, because every firewall implementation comes with a cost. So you might want it. If you can't afford it, you will not have the opportunity to be able to use it. Now we have 4 common architectural implementations of firewalls. So we have the packet filtering routers, we have the screen host firewalls, the dual home firewalls, and the screen subnet firewalls, just to mention them. Now, how do we select the right firewall? These are the things to consider when you're selecting the right firewall, or to be able to help you select the right firewall. The first thing is to ask, what does the firewall offer? In terms of the right balance between protection and costs for needs of the organization. What does the firewall offer you? That firewall that you are going to, you need to know exactly what it has to offer. And you look at the right balance between what protection it can give you as an organization and the costs that is going to, the costs for the needs of the organization. So you check that you don't put all your money into buying a firewall if it's going to go to the detriment of the company. So you need to have a balance in there. That's one of the very first things you need to look at before you select the right firewall. The second thing to do is that you need to know which features are included in base price and which are not. There are certain firewalls that when you buy on the base price per the cost of purchase, you will have for every other additional feature, you might have to purchase again. So you need to be very careful. It might be stated, but you need to know which of them is given to you on the base price and which one you have to buy in addition to that. Then you also need to look at the ease of setup and configuration. How accessible are staff technicians who can configure the firewall? With your current staffing, with your technicians, are they able to access the firewall and configure it? There's no need going to buy a firewall where no technician in your company is able to run a configuration on. So you need to be very careful about that. Now, the second most important issue is cost. So before you go for a firewall, you need to be very careful and know how much it costs you. Don't overwhelm in the purchase of a firewall. Now, when it comes to configuring and managing firewalls, what is there to know? You need to know that each firewall device must have its own set of configuration rules regulating its actions. That must happen. You must also check and make sure that the firewall policy configuration is usually complex and difficult, so be very careful. Configuring firewalls is not as easy as it usually seems. You need to also note that configuring firewall policies is both an art and a science. Just like we stated in the very first session that information security itself at some point is a science and at some point is an art. Now, when security rules conflict with the performance of business, security often loses. So be very careful that whatever firewall you are configuring and managing, you are able to find a balance with the performance of the business as with regards to the security of the business, so that you don't run at a loss. Now, what are content filters? We have software filters, which is not a firewall, but that allows administrators to restrict content access from within the network. Essentially, a set of scripts or program restricting user access to certain networking protocols or internet locations. So content filters can also be a program or a script written to be able to restrict certain access to certain users within the network or the protocols or the location that you find yourself. Now, content filters also have the primary focus to restrict internal access to external material. So you can use content filters to also prevent people within the company from trying to go out of the company to access material they've not been given the right to be able to go interact with. Also, with content filters, you realize that the most common content filters restrict users from accessing non-business websites and deny incoming spam. So you might have realized that people have said that when they go to work, they can't access the internet, they can't use certain tools, and so on and so forth. Yes, so this is just a typical example of the common use of content filters within that organization. Then we'll take a look at protecting remote connection. Protecting remote connection. Installing internet connections requires lease lines and so on and so forth. You need other data lines, then connections must be secured, and so on and so forth. And when individuals seek to connect to organizations' network, more flexible options must be provided. Options such as VPNs, which is known as virtual private networks, have become more popular due to spread of internet. So you have a case where you are a staff, but you are not within the organization's walls. You are out of the organization's walls. You want to have access to an office file so you can work on. Instead of the company allowing the file to be out there so it can be transmitted over the internet and be made known to everybody, the companies use virtual private networks. They create a secure connection between whatever location you are outside the company to the company, even though it's over the internet. And you can securely have access that you want with the organization's systems, and when you are done, the connection is working. You look at remote access. Unsecured dial-up connection points represent a substantial exposure to attack. If you want to access something remotely, usually you open yourself to attack. The attacker can use devices called wire dialer and so on and so forth to locate your connection point. When this happens, it means that you are giving the attacker the opportunity to use you as a point of entry. So remote access organizations must be very careful about how they go about their remote access, for which reason we have connections like the VPNs being introduced, and also tunneling in worst cases. So you can use VPNs, you can use tunneling, and this provide a secure way to be able to have remote accesses to organization when you are out of the organization's walls. Now there are 3 VPN technologies that are defined. We have the trusted VPN, we have the secured VPN, we have the hybrid VPN, just to mention them. Now, a VPN must accomplish the following. 1, encapsulation of incoming and outgoing data. A VPN must be able to encapsulate incoming and outgoing data. It must be able to encrypt incoming and outgoing data too. And also authentication of remote computer and remote user as well. These three things are things that you expect a VPN to be able to accomplish. Then when you are using VPNs, you are using the tunnel mode, the organization establishes two perimeter tunnel services. These services act as an encryption point, first of all, and encrypt all traffic that will traverse unsecured network. Then the primary benefit of this model is that an intercepted packet reveals nothing about true destination systems. So this makes it more secure. It helps you to hide out destinations of systems. An example of tunnel mode VPNs is the Microsoft Internet Security and Acceleration Server, the ISA. This diagram just gives an overview of what we're talking about so far. So in summary, if we look at firewalls, we know that it's a technology for packets filtering to dynamic stateful inspection. We know that it has architecture that vary with the needs of the network. We look at various approaches to remote and dial-up access protection. We had examples like Radius and the TACACs. Then we looked at content filtering, which are not firewalls, but help to restrict access to users within a certain location or network. We've taken a look at virtual private networks, and we've seen the encryption between networks over the internet. With this, we end the session and hope to see you in the next class. Thank you.